I know. If I sit here, will you be doing?
Set up over here.
I am Carol Mulready, the chairman of the League of Women Voters of Greater Hartford, and I will serve as the moderator. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation by citizens in government. We are fortunate to have several league members assisting us tonight as timers for the candidates and the question reviewers who will take your cards as you are inspired to compose a question. You just send them to the end of the row and we'll collect them. We also thank the Women's Club, particularly Mary Turner, for organizing the details of the event. We are pleased to be able to bring the forum to you in cooperation with the Simsbury Community Television, and they will show this numerous times in the days and weeks to come. The format for the evening will be what is called a cumulative time format, whereby the candidates each have a bank of 15 minutes to answer questions. They can respond as short or as long as suits them to get their message across. Each candidate will have a timer who's in the front row directly in front of them, who will hold up signs periodically to let them know how much time is remaining. They will start with 15 minutes, as I said. The first time you will be noticed that what the time is 10 minutes. So 5 minutes and then we'll go by and then we'll get 10 minutes. Candidates are asked to stick to the issues and not engage in personal attacks. The League of Women Voters of Greater Hartford has some prepared questions, and we invite and encourage written questions from the audience. Index cards have been made available. The league member will collect them as they are proposed and passed to the lead row. Lastly, we ask the audience to hold applause once the question period begins. And then at the end of the program, you are welcome to show your appreciation to the candidates who have given their time and effort to take part in this civic life of our country. A lottery determined in response to the questions, who gets the first question in the order. And we also did a lottery for the first 2 minutes opening statements. I do ask that you turn off your cell phones so that we will not disturb the candidates in the middle of the program. So thank you all. And we have the order for the opening statements, and I'm pleased to introduce to you Lisa Wilson-Foley will be first, Andrew Rohrback will be second, and Mike Clark will be third. Ms. Wilson-Foley.
Well, good evening, and
Put it on the page.
well, first of all, I am a 20-year resident of Simsbury, so I want to welcome you all to this town if you're not from here. It's a wonderful town to raise a family and live for quite a while. So thank you for being here, and thank you for the League of Women Voters, Carol and Mary Turner. It's great that they put on such a venue. You know, our country is undergoing 3 crises right now, and I believe that I'm uniquely qualified to solve some of those major issues. The first being that we have major debt. We have over $15 trillion of debt that we are putting on the backs of our next generation, our kids and our grandkids. I believe that's immoral. And being in business, I have balanced many budgets. In fact, we do more than balance them. And I believe that leaving our federal government to not have to balance the budget and put that kind of debt on the next generation when 49 states balance their budget, when you and I balance our family's budget, it's not right. That's one thing that I would certainly go and make sure we get a balanced budget amendment. We start putting a plan in place to dwindle down that debt. The second crisis that we have is a healthcare crisis. I spent over 30 years studying healthcare. I have a bachelor's in physical therapy. I have a master's in public health from Yale, and I'm on one semester left to get my doctorate in physical therapy. So not only do I know healthcare from a policy side, I've had businesses in the healthcare field. And the last is jobs. We have a jobs crisis. I don't just talk about jobs. I've created more jobs in the past 6 months than all my Democratic opponents had in their lifetimes. I've received no stimulus, no subsidy, no bailouts, personal risk, and personal finances. We are at a tipping point. We can be makers or we can be takers. We can be an entitlement society or we can be an opportunity society. I know what kind of country I want to fight for and what kind of country I want to live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I going to make the television unhappy if I don't use the microphone? No? We okay? We're good? Good evening. It's challenging for us as candidates to be given 2 minutes to impart to you what we're about. But in the 2 minutes that have been given to me, let me introduce myself and tell you what I hope you might wish to know. My name is Andrew Roraback. I live in Goshen with my wife Kara and our soon-to-be 3-year-old son, Andrew Kevin. I was born in Torrington, brought up in Litchfield. I'm a graduate of Yale College and the University of Virginia School of Law. After law school, I went home to Torrington to join my father, brother, and sister in the family practice of law, which was started by my great-grandfather in 1883. I'm the 4th generation of my family to practice law in Torrington. In 1994, I was first elected to represent the people of the 64th Assembly District in the House of Representatives, and in the year 2000, I was elected to represent the people of the 30th Senatorial District in the State Senate. For the past 12 years, I've been serving 15 communities in the Connecticut State Senate. I was brought up in a family where boasting was not encouraged, but my handlers have told me, forget about what your parents told you. There are some things that people ought to know about you if you're running for Congress. In the 18 years that I've served the people of Northwest Connecticut, I have never missed a single vote. I've been present for 8,475 consecutive votes. The people I represent work hard. I've always believed they deserve a legislator who tries to work as hard as they do. I'm currently the Republican leader on the Finance Committee, the Senate Republican leader, and in that capacity I've had the opportunity to push back on the largest tax increase in this state's history and some unconscionable borrowing for things like the New Britain to Hartford busway. And my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I appreciate your effort at being here. My name is Mike Clark, for those who don't know me. I've served as the town council chairman in Farmington for 3 terms, 6 years, up until 60 days ago when I turned that over to other Republicans. As far as my professional background, I currently work at United Technologies Corporation. I've been there for 8 years. I'm the manager of investigations, security, and compliance for Otis Elevator. It has 60,000 employees that work in 190 countries. And I've seen quite a few of them on the UTC travel program. The bulk of my experience, my professional experience, has been as an FBI special agent. I served 22 years as an FBI agent, and I had a great client. That client was the United States of America. I worked here in Connecticut. I worked on a number of public corruption cases that are fairly notable, and after September 11th, I worked on a number of anti-terror cases and spent considerable time overseas on that as well. I'd like to take a second. My daughter, Colleen, is here. On the personal side, I've been married to my wife for 34 years. She's parking the car and is late, as she sometimes is over the 34 years. My daughter, Colleen, is here as well. We have 4 children. Colleen is the youngest. She's the reason I can run, because she just graduated from the University of Vermont, and she's teaching in Avon. So now I got a big raise, and I can afford to try to run this program. As far as the why I'm running, 30 years ago, I took an oath of office. And that oath was protect and serve the Constitution of the United States. And when you look at the debt, when you look at the stagnant economy, when you look at Obamacare taking over health care in 2 years, There's so many, it has to give you pause. And so that is why I'm stepping forward, because I believe the legacy I'm going to leave my daughter and my grandchildren someday, I don't want to get you married, Colleen, so don't get there, but that legacy is not one of debt and stagnant economy. So I appreciate, we'll have a lot of time to talk this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. All right, we will begin the questions, and the order is for Mr. Rohrbeck to get the first question. Candidates are able to answer the same question if they so choose. That has been asked, that I asked. They can
Care about our children and the breathing issues that have incurred. But I also understand that sometimes we have a tendency to have the pendulum swing too far in one direction. And sometimes we keep regulations on the books that don't make sense anymore because of some of the new technologies that are out there, some of the new practices that are out there. So I am concerned that we don't put our businesses at such a disadvantage that they cannot compete any longer because the regulations are so onerous. It's hard to get new companies to start new products because of some of the EPA rules. So although I want to make sure that we do have a beautiful America, and that's why I love this country, and I want to make sure my 7 kids have a wonderful life and lifestyle here. I also want to make sure that we have a balance. Thanks.
Staying with this topic, and this question goes to Ms. Foley. What is your position on developing? Oh, you didn't get your turn? I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon.
And I don't know if, I'm guessing your question went specifically to proposals in Congress to roll back some of the Clean Air Act requirements that have come at a cost to business. But New England is on the receiving end of what is emitted from power plants in Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And that's why in Congress you've seen this debate not breaking down along party lines so much as it does break down along regional lines. We in New England have to be very mindful of the consequences of rolling back the requirements of the Clean Air Act to the air that we breathe. And I, for one, promote developing business, promote the development of energy in this country, but I don't think we ought to throw the baby out with the bathwater and allow for power plants to discharge contaminants that end up right here in Connecticut. So I'm against weakening those rules when they will visit harmful effects on all of us in this state.
Thank you very much. Now to Ms. Foley, the next question. What is your position on developing more nuclear power plants? And who would be responsible for funding such plants should they come online?
You know, our country does not have a very strong energy policy. We tend to rely on hostile countries, and we see our oil prices go up and down based on the issues in the Middle East. I want a very strong, planned out policy, and I believe that that's just going to drive our country forward. It should be a job-creating business. It should be an energy, insight to energy that will create jobs right here in our own country and keep us away from worrying about whether we're going for war because of oil. Nuclear energy is one source of energy, and obviously we had a very strong industry at one time. We cannot rely only on nuclear. I mean, we have one of the largest fuel cells industries right here in Connecticut. But we also have people that are investing in wind and solar, and those energies should certainly be part of the equation. So I actually would love to see government less involved in developing energy and have capital resources and capital money be more involved.
Thank you. Mr. Rohrbeck?
The good news is that this country now possesses energy reserves sufficient to power us for the next century. In the year 2000, we invested $13 billion in new oil and gas wells. This year, we'll be investing $143 billion in new oil and gas wells. Energy is one industry that holds out great promise for leading the economic recovery. I, for one, believe that we should exploit our domestic reserves of natural gas before we turn to nuclear power as a source of energy. In the fullness of time, none of us knows where technology will lead us. But what all of us should know is that we have the domestic capacity to meet our needs if only government will work with business instead of against business and allowing us to tap the reserves.
Thank you. Mr. Clark?
Great, thank you. Again, I believe that the United States government has failed in its energy policy. We need an all-the-above policy where we develop our natural gas resources, our oil, our coal, our solar, and nuclear is part of that equation. And so I very much support where nuclear power would be part of the equation, and I believe that it should be funded by private industry, however regulated by government agencies, so that we have tremendous safeguards in place.
Thank you very much. Just reminding everyone, if you come up with questions during this period, something stimulates you that a candidate says, you are welcome to submit a question. We do have a question from someone in the audience regarding Social Security, and this goes to Mr. Horvath. I think you get it first. After a life of having just enough, now at the age of 75, still paying into Social Security after 55 years as a self-employed professional, $1,700 a month is not enough. What will you do to protect my Social Security check and bring down the cost of living to help me and other senior citizens keep a higher degree of independence?
What I will do as a member of Congress is to take steps to restore to the system solvency. When FDR created Social Security, the youngest 90% of our society was asked to make sure that the oldest 10% of our society would have peace of mind and security in their retirement. The demographics have changed, and they've changed in a way that imperils not only the person who asked the question, but everyone in this room. If we are to have a Social Security system which is sustainable, we're going to have to look at adopting some of the recommendations contained in the Simpson Bowles report. None of them are appealing, and none of them are appetizing. But all of them are going to be essential if we're going to keep the system from collapsing of its own weight. So to the person who asked the question, my priority is to restore integrity to the system, because only when integrity is restored to the system can there be security that will be there not just for you, but for everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Clark?
Great. I read in Sunday's paper that 77 million baby boomers are coming online for Social Security and Medicare in the next 5 years. And that's kind of a remarkable number when you think about it. And again, Social Security, as Andrew pointed out, was set up, and it's a remarkable program. And it can be saved. Charles Crabham, one of my favorite editorialists, wrote that Social Security can be saved, and it's as simple as he put it, back in the envelope, simple. As far as funding it, keep it credible, and to make sure it goes in, it's available for the next generation. Because that's exactly what we have to do. We have to take certain steps to tweak this program to make sure that it's sustainable and that it will be there for not just my generation, the baby boomers, but those that come up in the future as well.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson-Bowles?
When I was 18, I decided to go into the field of physical therapy, and I did so because I wanted to help people. And I loved working with my elderly patients, and I would talk to them and hear their stories. And so for the person that put the question out there, The last thing I would want to do in going to Congress is to put your life savings and your plan for retirement at jeopardy. We need to take care of our seniors. They are, hold so much of what our country is so great about. And so we do need to make sure we shore it up and we protect it. We will have to make some changes for the younger generation. The system that was put in place is not probably going to be able to be there exactly the same way as it is for the elderly, but certainly anyone that's been relying on it and been paying into it, we want to make it, we shore it up, and if that anything, make it stronger.
Thank you very much. Let's move to a topic that is often paired with Social Security, Medicare, which is health care for many, many senior citizens across the country, most of them. Changes to this entitlement program are suggested by many national candidates because of the huge costs. What are your proposals for Medicare? And is it a necessary safety net, as it is, or with changes? And I think we have that first, Mr. Clark.
Again, we have a 15-minute limit here, and we could spend about 15 hours on Medicare. So it is absolutely a necessary program. There's no question about it. Matter of fact, for seniors who are currently beneficiaries of Social Security and Medicare, I believe that there should be no changes because they've made decisions, life decisions, in their savings and their pensions, and they've got a pact with the government. Now, for those 50 and younger, I think that we're going to have dramatic changes in both Medicare and Social Security because, again, with 77 million baby boomers coming online, it's expensive. And so we have to take the best minds, the best people. The Ryan Wyden plan is an example of just what things we have to put in place that, again, can save Medicare and make it available for those 50 and younger as they age and become beneficiaries.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson-Fuller.
Well, as I said in my introduction, I've been studying healthcare for many, many years. And we don't just have Medicare. We have Medicare A, we have Medicare B, we have Medicare D, we have Medicare Advantage. There's a variety of different types of Medicare. It's an important healthcare safety net for our seniors, but it does have problems. And I spoke with many hospitals over the past couple weeks, even just this morning I met with Hartford Healthcare and all of their subsidiaries, and we talked about some of the problems in the system. It's not something we're going to fix right now, and I can't give you all my answers today, but I am a creative problem solver. I look and I come up with innovative ideas. I've done it in my own healthcare businesses, and I've had many healthcare businesses, everything from rehabilitation to mobile diagnostics. I have a medical supply company. I have an institutional pharmacy. I understand healthcare from all of the different levels, and I believe that we will make changes, but we want to put someone in Washington that understands and is caring, compassionate, conservative, that will make the changes we need to make, but knowing that we're going to take care of the patients first.
Thank you. Mr. Warren?
Martin Luther King referred to the fierce urgency of now. And with respect to Medicare, the time has come for us to take the bull by the horns, because we're now spending $3 in that program for every dollar that we're taking in. By some projections, the program will go insolvent as soon as 2016. In this country, there's a 30% variance, depending on which part of the country you are in, as to how much is spent for each Medicare recipient. A 30% variance for the cost per recipient with no difference in outcomes. President Obama's health care plan is predicated on reducing payments to physicians to the tune of almost 20%. That component of the president's health care bill has been delayed repeatedly, most recently within the last month. And the reason it's delayed is because physicians say if it's implemented, they will stop seeing Medicare patients. We are building a healthcare system on a house of cards. And unless and until we have a serious conversation about how to make sure that utilization is responsible, that patients have some responsibility for their care, we're going to have a system in shambles in very short order.
Thank you. The next question, staying in the health area. Some put great hope in a national health care program. Why do you believe or not believe that a national program is the best answer? And this was before you get that first.
Well, being in the healthcare field and seeing how the private system works and knowing that we can provide awesome services with the private sector, I personally would rather not have the government involved in the doctor-patient relationships. Yes, we can look over to Europe and see the socialized medicine there, but you know, I had a daughter in high school that spent a year in France, and she lived with a physician and his wife who was a nurse. And they lived in a small townhouse in outskirts of the city in an area that was filled with dentists and doctors. And I realized that, yes, maybe their healthcare costs less, but their physicians do not have the lifestyle and the expectations that ours do in our country. And so we're not going to reduce our cost of healthcare based on changing the professionals. We can definitely provide quality service with private practitioners and clinical service that's the top of the world. And we've done that in the past. Government has a role, but I do not believe it has a national healthcare role.
Thank you. Mr. Orville.
Well, government is playing a huge role in the national healthcare field because more than half of every healthcare dollar spent is either a Medicare dollar or a Medicaid dollar, where the state partners with the federal government in paying for the cost of care. That being said, the president, Obamacare is a term of art, and I guess I'll use it here because everyone knows what I'm talking about. And there are parts of it about which I would like to be pejorative, and other parts of it which I don't think it's fair to be pejorative about. But Obamacare was constructed on a series of fictions, of financial fictions, not the least of which was the so-called CLASS program, which was the darling of Teddy Kennedy. The CLASS program was a long-term care insurance program which the federal government was going to market and which was going to underwrite the costs of Obamacare. The administration has abandoned all hope of implementing the CLASS program because instead of saving the $84 billion that it projected, it would cost us money as a society. I am very fearful of solutions being crafted at the national level. Having served as a state legislator for 18 years, and having watched as our state has taken steps to try to increase access through the Husky program and through greater rates of reimbursement under the Medicaid program, I think the states are a much better place for us to advance what I believe is the societal imperative to ensure that everyone has access to a basic package of essential care. Let each of the 50 states do the best work they can do, and let's each of us learn from the successes of one another and the failures.
Thank you, Mr. Clark.
Again, I view America's current healthcare system as a modern-day miracle. It is the greatest healthcare system in the world. And I've worked in my career, I've had 35 years of work experience. I've worked for the federal government in a very large agency, and I've worked in a very large private company. And I'm telling you right now, there is no way that a government-run healthcare system is going to run efficiently and effectively. So we will lose on two fronts. We will lose on cost, and we will lose on the quality of our program if we allow this to happen. And Andrew touched on a very good point. This is a house of cards that's doomed to fall. Obamacare is based on 8 years of revenue to fund 5 years of cost. And it just doesn't work. And everyone realizes it doesn't work. And so I think there's not a Republican candidate that I know that isn't going down there with a mandate to not allow Obamacare to move forward in 2014, because if you think $16 trillion of debt is a lot, wait till 2014 and this kicks in.
Thank you. The next question was handed to me. Prominent in the news is the mandated health plan coverage in the area of contraception and reproductive coverage. The Catholic Church and other religious-funded institutions objected on the grounds that this mandate forces them to fund something contrary to their beliefs. A proposed amendment to the mandate was defeated. Where do you stand on this issue? And Mr. Gorback, you get that question first.
Well, I think I stand with the vast majority of Americans, and I believe even the president himself, in recognizing that and understand, first of all, that this policy is the outgrowth of Obamacare. It is one of the constituent components of what's being done to implement Obamacare. The president's policy was an affront to everyone, no matter what their religious belief. It went way too far in prescribing that the government would dictate what religious organizations would do without regard to their conscience. I'm happy that the president has retreated, and retreated substantially on this issue. And I'm happy that the Catholic Hospital Association and others are breathing easier, knowing that what was proposed is not going to happen. I am convinced that people of goodwill working together will find a way to ensure that no religious institution will be compelled to offer coverage which is antithetical to its precepts, but all women who wish to have coverage for contraception will find a way for that coverage to be available no matter where they work.
Thank you. Mr. Clark.
Again, it comes back to a common theme from Washington, and that's the lack of common sense. Just why the government would be dictating to religious organizations, why they went down that road in the first place. Just there's no common sense in what's happened and the outrage that came from the church. It's just overreaching, and it just doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson.
As mom of 3 teenage daughters, I don't believe this issue is about contraception. It is about the First Amendment. And I believe you can't cut the First Amendment in half, but our government was overreaching, and I believe in religious freedom and liberty. So it's an issue for the First Amendment. It's not a reproductive issue or a woman's issue.
Thank you. Let's go on to a new topic. How about taxes? That's easy, right? Easy taxes. The first question will go to Mr. Clark. Many are concerned that the government is having to cut back on important services like education and veterans benefits because we don't have the money. One solution that is sometimes heard is something called a financial transaction tax. As I understand it, it's a small tax on trades on Wall Street. If we taxed each trade just 1/4%, that could raise about $150 billion a year. What is your view on the financial transaction tax?
Again, my view, I'm going to move away a little bit from the financial transaction tax, and just my view is that the government can raise more money. They're very good at that. What they have to do is control their spending, because again, the more you give government, the more they will spend. And so we can't fund some of our core programs because we've not prioritized what the government's role should be. In Washington, they want to do everything for everyone. And again, one of the areas that I'm going to draw from my experience as a mayor or the chair of a town council, you're forced, just like in Simsbury, West Hartford, Avon, where many of you are from, you are forced every year to prioritize and create a budget that's passed by the voters. Imagine if the federal government was going through the same process of being voted on every year. It would never pass because, again, they are just out of control with spending. So, again,
I'm in favor of not taxing any further, because again, the government will just find programs that may not be priority programs to spend it on.
Ms. Wilson-Foley.
Well, I'm in agreement. We have a spending problem, not a tax problem. And I would love to see our tax code reinvented and get rid of some of the archaic laws, get rid of some of the loopholes, make it simpler and fairer. And if we did that, we would have plenty of money to do the things that we want to do. But I believe our government is too big. It's gotten too big, and we are paying for a lot of bureaucracy that we do not need. So I don't want to see more taxes. I want to see more money in your pockets.
Mr. Warbeck.
I think a financial transactions tax at this moment in time would be about the least productive proposal that we could adopt. We need more revenue in this country. But the way we're going to get more revenue is by unleashing the entrepreneurial spirit and the free enterprise system that made America the greatest country on the planet. When businesses grow, they earn more money, they pay more taxes. When people have jobs, their incomes grow, they pay more taxes. Congress just passed a 2,300-page bill called the Dodd-Frank bill. That bill is wreaking havoc on Simsbury Bank and Trust, the Farmington Bank, the Torrington Bank, the Litchfield Bank. Don't think that overregulation of the financial services industry isn't hitting close to home. The only growth area in our local banks is the compliance department. I want to see the growth in the lending department because small business people have the confidence that our country is going to support them as they invest their capital and look to the future.
Thank you. You brought up the Dodd-Frank Act, and we have a question from the audience that is based on that. Our banking system is under severe stress as a result of the economic downturn, the subprime mortgage debacle, and the intense regulatory pressure. Do you think the Dodd-Frank Act will be a remedy or a deterrent? Ms. Wilson-Foley.
Oh, it definitely already is a deterrent. We are seeing banks having to merge small community banks. CBT recently was re-engaged. It came back and it had to sell out to Niagara because it couldn't survive. You know, my businesses take loans from many banks and I talk to them on a regular basis. And we are finding, they tell me directly, Lisa, we will loan to people that don't need the money. But if you're trying to start a business, you want to take a loan from your house or you want to get a small loan to kick off that business, they're not going to loan to you unless you have a seasoned track record of providing, putting out there a job and a business that actually has a good bottom line. So no, I do not believe that Dodd-Frank is going to be a positive force for growth in our country.
Do you wish to add anything, Mr. Warbeck, from what you said before?
I think it's important for people to understand that we don't fully appreciate the consequences of Dodd-Frank's because it obligates bureaucrats to engage in 230 separate rule-making procedures. Congress has abdicated its responsibility to come up with the rules and handed over power to people that are unelected and unaccountable. The upshot of these rulemaking procedures is going to be to inhibit greatly the growth and prosperity of our financial services industry, which in Connecticut is an industry that we look to get us through some very tough times.
Mr. Clark?
Again, it comes back to a recurring theme for me, and that, again, is common sense in Washington, where there's not a lot of it. John Patrick is the president of Farmington Bank. He's a friend of mine. Farmington Bank used to be Farmington Savings Bank, was a prosperous, profitable bank. Farmington Bank, because of Dodd-Frank, this year has spent $1 million on compliance, their new compliance program. They did not need a penny of bailouts. They needed no help from the federal government. What they got from the federal government is a $1 million bill. So tell me, how many jobs can John Patrick create in the Farmington Valley
if he could have invested that $1 million in new branches or hiring new employees to make loans to businesses. Quite a few. So for me, this legislation, it was, after Obamacare, this would be the second piece of legislation that I would go forward and try to repeal and replace.
Did we get everyone on this one? Did I get all of you? Okay. New question. Let's stick with budget for the budget part of our dilemmas. In December of 2011, congressional compromises, there was a congressional compromise to cut spending. I think $3 trillion was on the table. And that means changes to a lot of programs. You have spoken, some of you, about reducing spending as very important to you. The hardest thing in budgeting is how to make cuts. First, what is your spending priority if you are elected to Congress? And second, what is your priority for a program cut or a relation? And Mr. Rohrbeck, you get that first.
Thank you.
You need a revert.
Well, first, understand the pickle that we're in as a country. If we don't change our course now, in the year 2020, 92 cents of every tax dollar will be committed to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the national debt. So all discretionary spending, all military spending, will be competing for the last 8% of the revenue dollar that's coming in. So my priorities as a member of Congress, first has to be our common national defense. If we're not secure as a nation, nothing else matters. The second priority for me is to make sure that our transportation and infrastructure doesn't crumble before our very eyes. We as a country for too long have not made the necessary investments to sustain the infrastructure which allows our economy to grow. And education is a big priority of mine, but I think we all understand that education is funded locally with help from the state, and I don't think it's reasonable to anticipate the federal government will be doing a lot more in that area given the challenges we face with the other areas we have to deal with.
Mr. Clark.
Again, when you look at a federal government where 4 out of every $10 that is spent is borrowed, we are in an unsustainable fiscal path. It cannot be sustained. When we're at 15 trillion, approaching 16 trillion in debt, it can't be sustained. And so again, what we have to do is prioritize. Do what every local official does, do what every state official does. What core services are most important to your constituents? What do we expect from our federal government? And so in my eyes, some of those answers are very simple. Our national defense, obviously, is a core service. Our infrastructure, absolutely a core service. But what we need to do is spend time in Washington going through budgets like we do back here in our towns and cities in this state. And that's what's not being done. And it's an absolute mandate. And I believe that the 2012 election is really the turning point. We either make that decision in this coming election cycle, or we're going to go down a path and we won't be able to turn it around.
Ms. Wilson-Bolden.
In 2008, when our economy tanked, my businesses had to tighten their belts. And we did. We cut out every fat. We got as efficient as we possibly could. We got rid of the waste. And I looked up and I watched our state government and our federal government continue to grow. They were less efficient. They weren't looking at budget. They weren't trying to make the hard decisions that we as business people and in our family had to make. So, you know, it's interesting. Our government has already figured out where to make the cuts. There's been the Bowles-Simpson Commission. The GAO has already come out with lots of ways to make cuts. So it's not the way, it's the will and the courage of Congress. The problem is, You're sending too many people to Washington that want to get reelected, so they don't want to make some of the hard decisions that we have to make. In business, I've made those decisions. I do understand what it's going to take. It's not going to be easy, but you know what? It's going to be the best thing for the future of our country.
Thank you. A question has come from the audience that I think pertains well to this spending versus cuts. And this has to do with earmarks, and it relates to some other information I have as well. We hear a lot of negatives about earmarks, but are there any projects in the 5th District that you would try to get federal funding for? And so the 5th District is one aspect which is important, but we also have the whole state that you really represent. And part of what we had as a question deals with what happens if, with all the reductions that are planned for the post office, for example, and there are already legislators in Congress trying to roll back the 223 that have been asked for. And if something comes to, you know, the southeastern Connecticut with the submarine base and so on, is that an earmark? Is it protecting jobs? You know, how do you deal with these issues that you're trying to reduce debt, but it's also causing loss of jobs? So specifically address the 5th District, but address the state as well, please. Mr. Clark.
Sure. There's a tremendous difference between investment and just straight up spending. Now I'll give you one that I'll take away, and that would be the busway from New Britain to Hartford. I mean, tell me why in God's name we are spending money on that program. Now, areas where I would seek investment in our infrastructure would be, take the Mixmaster in Waterbury. All of us have been driving all over the 5th District, and you have to add a considerable amount of time to get to Danbury from Farmington because of that Mixmaster. Think of the elevated highway that leads into Hartford, which is in disrepair. That's an investment in your community, an investment in infrastructure. And so, again, you mentioned a couple of different areas. If it's an investment in the community, if it's an investment that will create jobs, and not just jobs, short-term construction jobs like the busway that will eventually be subsidized by all of us, but long-term investment in infrastructure, I would support that. However, spending, just irrational spending like that busway, absolutely not.
Ms. Wilson-Foley.
I don't believe in the earmark situation as it stands. It's become very political. It's money for you because you did some favors for the party, or it's, you know, it's hands in someone else's pocket. And I think that's where the citizens, the average citizens, don't like the idea. However, we should have some kind of a panel. I mean, we give this money to the federal government, and we want to make sure we get a lot of that back. Recently, our congressional delegation said that the majority, not the majority, but many of our bridges are some of the worst in the country. Well, yes, we need money for those bridges, and perhaps we should spend it on those kind of items instead of a busway to nowhere.
There's no question in my mind that the first responsibility of any member of Congress is to be an advocate for the people and communities that he or she represents. That advocacy takes many forms. Right now, the 5th District is being shortchanged when it comes to federal highway dollars. There is a pool of highway dollars which will be distributed. My job will be to make sure that we are given our fair share of that pool of dollars. That's not something any of us should apologize for. That's something all of us should tout as our strength. There are a lot of people sitting at home in the 5th District tonight wishing that they could go to work tomorrow morning. But because we haven't gotten our fair share of federal funding for transportation infrastructure, they're not going to work. So I want to go to work in Washington in order to ensure that the people of the 5th District go to work in the morning.
Thank you. We have a question on transportation, which you have brought up here. This one is specific to the need of repairing transportation infrastructure and improving
Would you endorse funding for high-speed rail, computer lines or light rail? Any other ideas? I'm sorry, did everybody hear that? I'm sorry I wasn't moving forward. Okay. And Ms. Wilson-Foley, you are first.
You know, right now, one of the biggest problems we have is our debt. So I don't believe that this is the time that we should be looking to spend more money. I think this is the time that we should reel back some of our regulations, get our economy kicking again, before we start spending money on things that we're not sure are going to work. Will people actually want to get on that rail? So I'm not saying that's a bad idea, and it's not something that we should continue to look at, but just this is not the time to be spending taxpayers' money when we don't have enough to meet our budget obligations as is.
Mr. Warbat?
Well, as I'm sure everyone knows, the state of Connecticut has already received a massive infusion of federal transportation dollars to improve the New Haven to Springfield rail line. Whether the benefit we derive from that investment will be commensurate with the cost to us as a society is very much open to doubt. The reason I voted against and spoke against the New Britain to Hartford busway serving on the State Bond Commission was because we have 247 unfunded transportation priorities in the state of Connecticut. And we allowed the Magic Bus to jump the line and commit $600 million to a 9-mile proposition when there are, in every community in this state, respectfully to Farmington, I get to drive from the capital of Goshen every night. And Route 4, we could use some investments there for those of us that are trying to get through the great city of Farmington.
Mr. Clark?
I'll wait for that money, Andrew. I'm all ears, trust me, on that bridge. But, you know, again, in many of the towns we live in, if you go to the budget sessions, the towns themselves have capital improvement plans that are 10 years out. So we know in Farmington, Simsbury, Avon, West Hartford, what roads are going to be paved in year 1, year 10, year 15, whatever, what bridges are going to be replaced, and the capital improvement plans. The federal government doesn't have that. They just put these Band-Aids on, like this busway, because, hey, they can spend $600,000, and it sounds like a great program, and maybe the governor loved this program. So there's no coherent national transportation plan. And when you talk, the original question was about high-speed rail. High-speed rail will work great where I grew up in northern New Jersey if you want to commute into New York City. High-speed rail here in Connecticut would be a failure because we will end up subsidizing it because not enough people are going to take it. And so you have to determine what area of the country, but as far as Connecticut is concerned, in the 5th District, I can't imagine an area where a high-speed rail system would be an effective expenditure of money.
Ms. Wilson-Foley, sorry.
Yeah, no, I went first.
You've already gone. Okay, I'm sorry, I put it wrong number. We're moving to foreign policy. The support of Israel by the USA is a long-standing position. What is your view on how the U.S. should handle Israel's apparent aggressive approach to Iran? And that's Ms. Foley. Ms. Wilson-Foley.
Well, first of all, I am very pro-Israel. They are one of the 2 countries that support us. They have our back all the time. And so my policy is that if Israel wants and feels necessary to protect themselves in a very hostile region, then I would support them, whether continued financial aid. I know we give them about $3.2 billion a year. I would commit to continuing that and perhaps giving them other military capability if we needed to.
Thank you. Mr. Clark, would you take it next?
Sure. Israel is, without question, our greatest strategic partner in the Middle East. It's the one stable democracy in the Middle East. It's been an ally for decades. And so again, obviously we would, I believe that we have to support Israel. As we all know, following the news, Iran is the greatest threat
right now to world peace. And some very, very difficult decisions are going to be made in the next several months concerning just how to handle their desire to develop a nuclear weapon. And so, again, the United States, we have to work very hard at putting in place, everything that we can short of military power to force Iran to drop that.
Thank you. Could I have a time check of what each candidate has for?
We'll all take advantage of Andrew now. He has no more time left, so
So, are there any other questions from the audience?
You get the answer.
I know, he doesn't accept. That's why I was checking. I knew he was getting close to the end of time. Mr. Warbeck has no time, 10 seconds. So I just wanted to check that if there were any other questions, because I told the candidates at the beginning that if there were questions from the audience, we could extend, and then we'd have to add time to their clock, because we are coming up to the hour that we allowed for the program. So you're right in the correct areas. But 10 seconds to answer that question. Mr. Warbeck, good luck.
I do have a very strong opinion. I visited Israel with the Aspen Institute, and after this forum, I would like to engage anyone who would like to have a thoughtful conversation about this very important issue.
Thank you very much.
there's a very large red sign that they put up that tells us our time's up, so.
That's true. So we will end with this question that came from the audience, a general philosophy question. Washington is a big and complicated place, and we live in a networked world. How would you use your professional and political network to help get these things done in Washington and best help our congressional district? So those of you who want to hear Mr. Warbeck will have to get him at the end of the session. Ms. Wilson-Ford.
You know, I've spent 20 years in a variety of businesses, and sometimes I've been across the table, someone wanted to buy my business or I wanted to buy theirs. We didn't have the same end goal. You know, they wanted to buy it for less and I wanted to sell it for more. But you know, I've had 16 different companies. Some I've bought, some I've sold, some I've founded, and I still have. And I've been able to do those deals because I know I'm going to leave a little on the table. And I'm going to keep my core principles, whether it's a certain price or certain thing that I'm not willing to negotiate on. But I know that there are areas that I will negotiate. A lot of the work that's done in DC is in committees. I've been on many committees. I've been in very leadership roles in nonprofit organizations. I've had statewide chairmanship roles, and I do know how to work well with people. I wouldn't be able to have 500 employees that continue to work with me. While I'm running for Congress, they've all stepped up. They're very excited about my campaign. They know that I will bring something very different to Washington. I have a different voice. I'm an outsider. I have not been so ingrained in the political sphere and circle. I care about what's going on Main Street. I want to go to Washington, get the job done, and come back home. We have a lot of work to do. And if we do it right, we can get more people to work. Thank you.
Mr. Clark.
Great. My bottom line is I'm going to bring the core principles that I've worked 35 years with. As an FBI agent, I'm going to bring integrity to Washington. And again, as the mayor of a small town of 26,000 people, I'm proud of what I did there. As far as paying off debt, paid off 20% of Farmington's debt in my 6 years. Of creating jobs in Farmington. More people commute into Farmington than live there. We've had grand list growth. And again, we've had our Moody's AAA rating upgraded in the last 2 years. Upgraded, not downgraded, which I think is a national embarrassment, and also for the state of Connecticut to be downgraded. So rather, I'm going to bring those core principles to Washington. And I'm going to stick by them, because again, I'm not there to be a career politician. I'm not there to get a pension or to make a living down there. I'm going to Washington to represent your interests and get this tremendous, wonderful nation back on its feet and get some fiscal responsibility brought back to the United States of America.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of our hour. I want to thank the Simsbury Public Community Television Station for helping us with this evening so that the information that we have heard from the candidates can be shared with the wider community. We very much appreciate you being here. We thank the Simsbury Republican Women's Club for inviting us to help you with this event, and we hope you have learned something